Hi, I'm James Frohlich. I'm an adjunct professor at Dallas Theological Seminary in Houston.
James, welcome. Thank you for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
I appreciate you all having me.
It's great. And I see you a lot here at the library. You're studying and working away.
Sure.
But part of what you do is you teach as an adjunct at Dallas Theological Seminary, really known around the world for its excellence, particularly in biblical languages. How did you get started reading Hebrew?
Yeah, so I teach Hebrew at the Houston Extension for Dallas Seminary. I got started reading Hebrew really through Greek. I went to college wanting to be a youth pastor, and part of my requirement for doing that was to take Greek. And as I was taking Greek about the first or second semester, I really began to fall in love with it. Had a professor who said, as dear as the gospel is to us, that's how hard we need to contend for its languages, because once we get away from the languages, we can tend to get into doctrinal error. The Bible can't mean anything theologically until it first means it grammatically. And that, of course, is grammatically in the original languages, not in English translation. So that was the beginning of really loving the languages. I decided pretty soon after that I wanted to go to seminary. And I had a girlfriend at the time that I knew I wanted to marry right out of college. And I thought, hey, why don't I take Hebrew now while mom and dad are still paying for it, instead of doing it later when I'm married. So I changed my major to biblical languages at that point, and took 2 years of Hebrew in college and 3 years of Greek. And after that,
so even by the time you got to seminary, you were pretty well stoked for the languages.
Yeah, 3 years of one and 2 of the other, and never regretted it. Enjoy it, and enjoy teaching it, and that's why I'm here today.
One of the things that happens in teaching it is you sort of reinforce all the learning that you've had.
Oh, sure,
all
yeah.
these years. I mean,
those first year grammatical concepts that tend to slip. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, today we're going to talk about the book of Ruth, and it's one of my favorite little books in the Bible. And there's some really interesting stuff that's happening in the book of Ruth.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, you've got 3 examples.
Sure.
So let's talk about each one of them, and let's start with the first one.
Sure. So my first example begins in Ruth 1:14. Many of our listeners, I'm sure, will know the story. Naomi is encouraging Ruth and Orpah to leave her because she feels like she can't offer them anything. At this point, they're kind of walking back to Bethlehem, and Ruth 1:14 says, "They wept out loud. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her." And that word cling is the one I want to talk about. Many of our major English translations will have a form of that in Ruth 1:14. For example, the ESV says, "What Ruth clung to her." NIV has the same thing, Ruth clung to her. The New Living Translation has Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. NASB and CSB have something very similar. But there's a play on words on this word cling, or in Hebrew, dabak, that we sometimes miss in the English translations. And that is later on in chapter 2, verse 8 of Ruth, we see this same word dabak again, but sometimes we can't tell that in English. This is Ruth 2:8. This is Boaz and Ruth. They're beginning to speak to each other for the first time. And Boaz tells Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, don't glean in another field or leave this one, but instead keep close to my young women." That keep close translates dabak, which was...
to cling.
Yeah, which was to cling earlier back in chapter 1. Well, that's the ESV, and many of the other English translations
they do the
same thing. NIV says, "Stay here with the young women." New Living Translation says, "Stay right behind the young women." The NASB says, "Join my young women." CSB, "Stay here close to my female servants." So all of them kind of, at least in the English translation, you can't tell this play on words for dabak. And this same word, dabak, is used in Genesis 2:24, where it says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and the two become one flesh." So I wonder, maybe there's a little bit of foreshadowing here of clinging to Naomi and then clinging to the young maidens, and perhaps, later clinging, although I don't think the word is used in chapter 4 when she's clinging to her husband.
But it may be implied, right? She's moving her way into that. That's very, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
So dabach all the way in those three places. Genesis 2.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, as well.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and so that's something that I think we miss in English translation.
You can't see that. No, in fact, our translations sort of obscure that.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe we'll go on to the second example. The second example is somewhat similar, a word used twice in the Hebrew text of Ruth that doesn't always come out in the English translations. And this one is in Ruth 2:11. Again, this is Ruth and Boaz still talking back and forth when they meet each other for the first time. And Boaz says, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been told to me, how you left or forsook your father and mother and your native land and came to a people you didn't know before." All right, that word left or forsake is the Hebrew word azav. Now, a lot of times we don't realize this, but we see this word again, and that comes just a few verses later in Ruth 2:16. Now, at this point, Boaz has stopped talking to Ruth, and now he's talking to his workers, and he tells his workers, "Hey, pull out some extra from the bundles and leave it or forsake it. Leave it behind for Ruth, azav." So that in response to Ruth leaving her father and mother and her homeland, now Boaz is going to leave some behind for her while she's gleaning.
Just a little extra, right?
Yeah, well, more than just a little, right?
Well,
she gets home, right? She gets home, and Naomi's like,
right.
"Where did you glean today?" She's gleaned something like 30 pounds of barley, which usually a man would get maybe 2 pounds in a day. So she's got like 2 weeks worth, so much so that her mother-in-law is like, "Where did you go?" And so I think...
it's terrific.
Yeah, so we begin to see, Boaz kind of pronounces this blessing over Ruth. When they meet, and he, because he's been told all these wonderful things she's done, he says, "May the Lord repay you for your work. May your wage be fully rewarded by the Lord." And it's almost like we begin to see Boaz himself is sort of the agent of this blessing by, making her reward complete by leaving a little extra for her on the ground. So much so that she comes home and she's got like 2 weeks worth of work.
Well, he's the Redeemer, right? He's the Goel. He's the one who is sort of designated or will be designated.
Sure, yeah, the second in line, right? Yeah, there's that closer one.
Yeah, there is a closer one, but he sort of said, "No, thank you."
Yeah.
But now Boaz says, "I'm ready. I'm ready for this."
Yeah,
That's
at least
great.
in part. Yeah. So he begins to fulfill that blessing here. But that blessing goes on, which leads me to my third example in Ruth. When Boaz tells Ruth, "Hey, may the Lord repay what you've done. May your reward be fully given from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to trust." That word wings is the Hebrew kanaf. And it can refer to things like the wings of a bird and so forth. Clearly here it's an anthropomorphism, referring to God as kind of like a protector with wings, and may He protect you is kind of what Boaz is saying.
Yeah.
Now, many of our English translations have the word wings here. The Net Bible doesn't. It translates kind of idiomatically. The Net Bible has, "May your acts of kindness be repaid by the Lord, the God of Israel, from whom you have sought protection." So it's a bit idiomatic, so it doesn't have that wing element in there.
It doesn't have the beauty of it either.
Yeah. Now, a lot of the other ones do. NIV has "under whose wings you've come to take refuge." New Living Translation, "under whose wings you've come to take refuge." The NASB, ESV, CSB, they all have wings, at least here in Ruth 2:12. But kanaf, or wings, is used later. And this is one that a lot of readers would miss if they're reading in their English Bible. And that is wings, or the Hebrew term kanaf, occurs in chapter 3. This is where Ruth comes to visit Boaz, at the threshing floor, with her mother-in-law is kind of urging. And chapter 3, verse 9, here's Boaz kind of awakened from sleep. "Who are you?" And she answers, "I am Ruth, your servant." And then she goes on to say something that we often miss in the English translations. The Net Bible was really idiomatic here. It says, "Marry your servant, for you are the redeemer of the family's interest," which is very idiomatic, but it misses what's going on here.
Yeah, exactly.
NIV and the New Living Translation say, "Spread the corner of your garment over me." NASB has something similar. The ESV and the CSB, though, translate the word kanaf here with wings, and that is the edge or the extremity of the garment is referred to in Hebrew as a wing. The ESV and CSB have something similar. ESV is, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. So what is referred to with the edge of the garment in a lot of these English translations, or marry me, the Net Bible, kind of picking up on this custom of spreading the garment, is referring to protection in marriage.
Right.
The ESV and the CSB have a little bit more woodenly the term wing, spread your wing over me. So it's almost like, here's Ruth saying, hey, Boaz, remember that time, back a couple months ago where you said, I've come to trust under the Lord's wings, and you gave me some extra food, and you said, may my reward be complete. Well, why don't you finish that reward? I.e., put your money where your mouth is, and you being the wings of the Lord, and spread your wings over me, and marry me, and give me that protection you called that blessing over upon me earlier.
So Boaz becomes the agent of God's blessing then for her.
Yes, exactly. Again, right? Because the first time it's through the extra food. Now it's through the bigger issue of marriage and so forth.
Right. Marriage commitment and that covenant, and of course that becomes so important for the line of Jesus. At the very end of the book of Ruth, there's a genealogy that's picked up in the New Testament.
Sure.
That's describing how Ruth figures into the lineage of King David and such. So really interesting stuff. James Frohlich, thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
It's been my pleasure. I appreciate y'all having me.
If you learned too much today and your head is hurting, there's one sure cure. That is to share this podcast with a friend. We hope you've enjoyed Exegetically Speaking. If you have never visited Wheaton College, I hope you'll make plans to do so. We have a wonderful campus year-around. And if biblical languages are your fancy, check out our MA and BA programs at Wheaton College, wheaton.edu. Look for modern and classical languages. That's the best place to get started. If you have comments, you have questions, you just want to be in touch, please email us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for all those who make this possible. You know who you are. Until next time, thanks for listening.